The stately dining hall of Duke Halvar of Brineshade was steeped in the warm glow of flickering candlelight, but the air was far from pleasant. Duke Halvar, a stocky man with a fiery temper and a love of long-winded grievances, paced back and forth before his seated retainers. In a guttural rage, the Duke shouted, "That insufferable Lord Changeling, stealing my tribute route to the Amber Vale, claiming he negotiated the tariffs, a deception as transparent as his hair dye." His words piercing the ears of all who sat near him. His retainers nodded obediently, though their enthusiasm varied. Most had mastered the art of feigned outrage. In the corner of the room, a young servant stood by the wine decanter, silent and unnoticed, save for the occasional flick of his nervous gaze toward the grand clock mounted above the hearth. Halvar continued his tirade, listing every grievance Changeling had inflicted upon him, real or imagined. Midway through a particularly scathing remark about the Lord's choice of footwear at the last summit, he turned sharply toward the servant. "You there? Pour me more wine. If I'm to endure the memory of that man, I'll need my cup full." The servant stepped forward quickly, almost too quickly, clutching the decanter with white-knuckled fingers. He filled the Duke's goblet with an unsteady hand, his posture unusually stiff. "Careful!" Halvar shouted, narrowing his eyes at the servant before waving him off with a dismissive grunt. The servant retreated back to his corner, his glance once again drifting to the clock. One of the retainers noticed. His name was Torrin Brynley. A wiry, sharp-faced man with a hawk-like demeanour leaned forward, eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Why do you keep looking at the clock, boy? Something more pressing than serving your duke?" The servant froze for half a second before replying, his voice a touch too high, too eager. "Oh no, my lord, I was only concerned about the evening's preparations. Tonight's meal is of particular importance." Torrin arched an eyebrow. "And what are we to be graced with tonight that requires such concern?" The servant clasped his hands nervously, lowering his head in respect. "A starfruit petal salad. A refreshing blend of glowing starfruit and Feywild petals dressed in honey nectar vinaigrette, a delicacy from the moonlit groves of Evereska. For the main, savour the lunar glazed venison, tender cuts roasted with moonlit herbs and draped in a midnight pear reduction inspired by the enchanted emberwood hearths of Fowlan. Concluding this celestial experience is the moondrop sorbet, a rare Feywild delight of moondrop grapes chilled with mystical frost, as ethereal as the night itself," concluded the servant. Torrin, unimpressed by the flourish, waved a hand dismissively. "Go check on it then. Better for you to fret over salad than clock hands." The servant bowed deeply and left, his measured pace belying the frantic energy building in his chest. Once out of sight, he veered down a quiet corridor and slipped into a modest servant's chamber, bolting the door behind him. Inside, the room's sole occupant was tied firmly to a chair, ropes digging into his sleeves. His head lolled as if he were waking from a deep sleep. The servant exhaled deeply, and his form began to ripple like water disturbed by a sudden breeze. The illusion melted away, revealing the true visage of Nyx, a changeling male with smooth greyish-blue skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. His face was clean-shaven, angular and sharp, with an air of quiet confidence. His white hair, slicked back with precision, crowned his head, the sides shaved to emphasize his striking features. He looked to the bound servant and said, "Well, I must thank you for letting me borrow you for a while. You've been an excellent host." The bound servant groaned weakly, eyes fluttering open in confusion before widening in panic. He struggled against his bonds, managing a muffled yell through the gag. "Ah, right. You'll forget all about this in a moment. Just a quick tweak here. A little memory scrub there," Nyx said comfortingly. However, the servant's muffled protests grew louder. Nyx pulled out a scroll of Modify Memory with a flourish, only to fumble it as the servant jerked against the chair, the scroll slipping from his grasp and scattering others from his bag. "Stars above? One moment, please," Nyx uttered, as the servant, the real servant, screamed against his gag. Nyx managed to retrieve a silent scroll, fumbling briefly with the activation sigil before the magic burst to life. The room fell eerily quiet. He unrolled the Modify Memory scroll, the arcane words glowing faintly as he began to chant. With a soft pulse of magic, the servant's eyes dulled and his struggles ceased. "There we go. Much better. You'll wake up thinking you had an excellent nap and no memory of this handsome intruder. Thanks again for your hospitality," said Nix. With that, he slipped out the window, landing nimbly on the cobblestones below, or mostly nimbly. His foot caught the edge of a planter, sending it tumbling over with a crash. "Damned pots!" Nix exclaimed. With the flick of a wrist, he pulled a hood over his head. "Time to report back to Lord Caelan," he murmured to himself, brushing dirt from his sleeve. "He'll want to know just how loud Duke Halvar likes to shout about his shoes, and how easily his trust can be misdirected." His mission complete, he disappeared into the night with his grin as sharp as the rapier at his side.